The bank lobby was quiet, the kind of quiet where every whisper feels loud. A young black man, Michael Carter, stepped forward to the counter. He said softly, "I just want to see my balance." The branch manager, Mr. Collins, overheard and burst out laughing. "You need at least $100 to check anything in this branch," he mocked loudly. Customers chuckled. A few shook their heads. Michael stayed calm, sliding his ID across the counter. The manager smirked until the screen loaded. His face went pale, silent, frozen. Before we begin, subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from so we can bring more stories like these. Morning came softly for Michael Turner, the kind of morning that didn't demand anything from him yet, didn't pull him in 10 directions, didn't remind him of expectations or weight or judgment. Just calm. He liked mornings like that. He woke before his alarm, stretching slowly in the dim glow of sunrise slipping through his bedroom blinds. His apartment was simple, neat, clean, organized. No fancy decor, no expensive art, no flashy signs of success. Just quiet, lived-in warmth. A plant he remembered to water, maybe twice a week. Books stacked beside his bed. A single photo on the dresser. His mother smiling with tired eyes. Michael moved through the kitchen barefoot, the tile cool under his feet. Breakfast was the same every day. 2 eggs, toast, and coffee strong enough to jolt a memory awake. No luxury gadgets, no gourmet. He'd had more before, or rather, he'd earned more. Quietly, patiently, through grinding work, late nights, and long years of sacrifice most people didn't know about, and many wouldn't believe. But he didn't flaunt any of that. He didn't dress like money, didn't talk like money, didn't move through the world like someone who had an 8-figure balance resting quietly in a bank account he almost never mentioned. Success didn't erase how people saw his skin. So Michael kept his wealth tucked away the same way he kept his emotions tucked away. Close, quiet, private. He finished his coffee, rinsed the mug, and grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door. His shoes were simple, worn but clean. His button-down shirt was ironed but ordinary. He blended in, intentionally. Outside, the morning air was crisp with a cool city breeze. Michael inhaled deeply, letting that clean, early stillness settle into him before walking toward the bus stop. He didn't drive his newer car on weekdays. He didn't want to deal with traffic or stairs or assumptions. The bus was easier, predictable, comfortable, safe enough. He stood under the shelter, hands in his pockets, nodding politely to the older woman beside him. "Morning," he said, with a soft smile. "Morning, baby," she answered warmly. When the bus arrived, he stepped aside and let others on first, a routine kindness, one he didn't think much about. But people noticed. They always noticed his calm, his patience, his gentleness. He took an empty seat by the window and glanced outside as the city slowly woke up. Commuters dragging tired feet. Kids laughing at nothing important. Street vendors setting up. A traffic cop sipping coffee like it was the fuel keeping him upright. The bus rocked gently, humming along its route. Michael leaned back, relaxing into the familiar motion. He didn't need the mask yet. The polite half-smile, the restrained tone, the quiet endurance that came with moving through the world as a soft-spoken black man in spaces built for louder, whiter voices. For now, he could breathe. When his stop arrived, he stepped off and walked down the block toward the bank. The morning sun glowed on the glass doors. reflecting a version of himself he didn't quite recognize sometimes, a grown man still learning to navigate assumptions he never asked for. He checked his watch. 8:17 a.m. Right on time. The bank wasn't busy. A few people in line. A couple sitting with a loan officer. A security guard nodding half distractedly. Michael smiled politely at the guard. "Morning." The guard blinked, surprised anyone acknowledged him, then returned the smile. "Morning, sir." Michael stepped into the slow-moving air-conditioned quiet and took a moment to appreciate its normalcy. Nothing dramatic, nothing special, just a simple trip to the bank to check on something routine. Standard account maintenance. No fuss. He slid his hands into his pockets, feeling that steady calm again. This was the kind of errand that didn't require effort, didn't require explanations, didn't require proving himself. Just a line, a counter, a simple question. He waited patiently, humming lightly under his breath. The hum carried the tone of someone used to keeping himself centered, someone who had learned long ago that self-calming was a survival skill. People came and went. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly overhead. The soft beeping of a counting machine clicked rhythmically from behind the counter. Michael stood there, quiet, respectful, unassuming. Just another man handling his business on a weekday morning. Stop. If anyone passing by saw him, they'd see a man who blended in easily. Simple clothes, simple posture, simple presence. Someone they'd assume was here to ask for a balance check, or a payment extension, or a small withdrawal. Someone they'd assume wasn't a threat, but also wasn't someone important. Someone safe to ignore, safe to dismiss. Michael didn't know yet how quickly that normal moment would twist. He didn't know the storm that was waiting behind the counter, the assumptions people would make, the disrespect that would press into him like a familiar bruise. He didn't know he was about to become the center of a scene he never asked for. But for now, he just stood in line, calm, collected, patient, ready to ask a simple question. A normal man in a normal morning, seconds away from the tiny cuts that would bleed into humiliation, seconds away from being reminded, once again, that people assumed they knew his worth before he even opened his mouth. The line moved slowly, not painfully slow, just the usual crawl of weekday banking. Michael didn't mind. Patience came easy to him. Years of waiting rooms, long commutes, and quiet endurance had taught him how to let time pass without letting frustration take hold. But as he stepped forward, the atmosphere shifted. Not loud, not obvious, just different. The kind of shift someone like him felt immediately, because he'd lived it too many times. Behind the counter, one teller, a middle-aged woman with a crisp bob haircut, straightened abruptly when she saw him approaching. Her smile thinned. Her posture tightened. Her tone changed from warm to clipped in the span of a heartbeat. "Next," she called. But her eyes flicked past Michael as though hoping someone else would step forward instead. A man in a business suit behind him took the invitation and tried to walk past. He didn't look at Michael, didn't apologize, just assumed he could cut in. Michael held out a gentle hand, palm open. "Excuse me, I'm next." The suited man blinked, taken aback, and huffed. "Fine," he muttered, stepping back as though he'd been inconvenienced. The teller's expression didn't soften. Michael approached the counter politely. "Morning." The teller forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hello. What do you need today?" Before he could answer, a second employee, a younger man at the next station, leaned toward her and whispered something behind his hand. They both glanced at Michael, then away. The look was quick, subtle, but familiar. "He probably needs overdraft help," Must be here about some issue. Probably confused. Michael ignored it. He'd had practice. I'd like to inquire about my account balance, he said calmly. The teller's eyebrows rose just slightly, a micro-expression of surprise, or maybe doubt. Your balance? She repeated slowly, like she was clarifying something complicated. Yes, Michael said politely. A throat cleared behind him. A woman, older, in a fancy coat, spoke sharply. Are you sure you're in the right line? Customer service is over there, she said, pointing toward the side office. Michael blinked. This is the correct line. She forced a too bright laugh. Oh, I just assumed you needed help setting something up. He offered a tight smile, but didn't respond. He'd learned that dignified silence often spoke louder than confrontation. The teller finally nodded, stiffly, typing hesitantly into her computer. As she worked, another banker, a man in his 40s, wearing a navy suit and polished shoes, walked by with a stack of papers. He glanced at Michael, then at the teller, then back at Michael again. You know, the banker said casually, you can check your balance at the ATM outside. Michael nodded politely. I'm aware. It's quicker, the banker added, tone dipped in condescension, straightforward, meaning small, meaning insignificant, meaning not worth a teller's time. Michael kept his voice steady. I just need a representative to check it today. The banker said, shrugging. All right, if you're sure. The teller typed slower than she had for the customer before him. Much slower. Her shoulders stiff, her lips pursed, as if she expected something to go wrong. Another glance passed between her and the young employee. Michael waited, hands tucked calmly in front of him. He refused to let his posture show the sting. He'd learned long ago not to give people the satisfaction of seeing their judgments land. Still, each small moment was a pinprick. The subtle shift in tone, the glance of assumption, the hesitation to believe he had business here. The man trying to cut in front. The suggestion that he'd chosen the wrong line. None of it was aggressive. None of it loud. None of it headline-worthy. End of statement. But it added up. It always added up. The teller cleared her throat. Could you verify your ID? Of course, Michael said, already pulling his wallet out. She inspected the card for far longer than necessary, holding it up to the light, flipping it twice, squinting like she expected it to be fake. Behind him, someone whispered, he probably doesn't have much in there. Another chuckled. Yeah, he's probably here to dispute some overdraft fees. Michael exhaled quietly, eyes lowering. He didn't react. Couldn't react. Not here, not when every stereotype in the room was waiting for a reason to lay claim to him. The teller handed back his ID and resumed typing. We're a little busy this morning, she said irritably, though there were maybe 2 customers waiting. That's all right, Michael replied gently. I'm not in a rush. This seemed to annoy her further. She sighed and waved down a passing manager, a thin, balding man with glasses. Mr. Collins, she said, could you assist? I think this might need your authorization. Michael stiffened slightly. Why would a simple balance inquiry need a manager's authorization? Collins approached, hands clasped behind his back in a posture that screamed self-importance. He barely looked at Michael, glanced once, dismissively, then turned his attention to the teller. What's the issue? He asked. No issue, Michael said politely. I just came to... Collins raised a hand, silencing him without looking. Let's not waste time, he said briskly. 9 times out of 10, these inquiries don't require staff involvement. That's why we have ATMs and mobile banking apps. Michael nodded once. I understand. I'd still like you to check it for me." A small laugh rose from someone in line. Collins forced a chuckle. "Sir, the ATM can show your balance just fine, especially if it's—" he waved a hand vaguely, "simple." Michael took a slow breath. "Please," he said, "just run it." Collins rolled his eyes dramatically. "Fine, but I don't entertain nonsense requests." He turned to the teller. "Pull it up." She hesitated. "Sir, maybe you should—" "I said pull it up," Collins repeated, tapping the counter impatiently. Michael swallowed, held his calm, held his dignity. He had to. He always did. Small humiliations pressed into him like invisible weights. But even he didn't know how quickly the tide was about to turn. Collins leaned over the computer, tapping a few keys with theatrical boredom. And then, his smirk vanished. The teller gasped loudly. The young employee's jaw dropped. The suit behind Michael stopped breathing, because on the screen, glowing in bright digital clarity, was an 8-figure balance. 8 figures. Michael didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Every assumption, every whisper, every belittling tone, every subtle insult collapsed in an instant. The sound that followed wasn't loud. It wasn't a scream or a gasp or a dramatic shout. It was silence. A heavy, suffocating, bone-deep silence. The kind that drops into a room like a stone falling into water, rippling outward in waves no one can ignore. Mr. Collins didn't move. He was frozen in place, hunched over the teller's desk, one finger still hovering above the keyboard. His eyes were locked onto the screen, growing wider and wider until they looked almost cartoonishly large behind his glasses. 8 digits, not counting the decimals, not counting the commas. 8 figures. For a split second, Michael wondered if maybe it wouldn't be as bad as it felt. Then Collins made a sound, a tiny, choked half-cough, half-gasp, and stumbled backward like someone had shoved him. The teller, hands trembling, covered her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. The young banker who'd exchanged glances earlier blinked rapidly, his throat bobbing in a hard swallow. A woman in line actually leaned forward, squinting at the screen, like her eyes might be deceiving her. Michael felt every pair of eyes in that bank land on him, sharp, wide, stunned, confused. The same people who had dismissed him 5 minutes ago now stared like he'd just turned into a different species. He didn't want that stare. He never had. But there it was anyway. Collins finally found his voice, thick and shaky. That must be a mistake. Michael inhaled slowly. "It's not." The teller glanced at him, shame flooding her expression. I didn't realize." Michael cut her off gently, not unkindly, just tired. "You don't have to finish that sentence." The suited man behind him, the one who tried to cut earlier, took a step back, his face flushing an ugly red. He wasn't embarrassed for Michael. He was embarrassed for himself. Collins stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Sir, if you'd like to, come to my office, we can discuss." Michael shook his head calmly. "I don't need a meeting." The manager blinked. "But your account, I only asked for a balance check," Michael reminded him. His voice stayed even, polite, controlled, the same voice he'd used earlier when they doubted him, dismissed him, talked down to him. Collins nodded jerkily. "Yes, of course. Let me, print that for you, sir. Please, allow me." He rushed to the printer behind the counter, nearly tripping over a chair leg. Someone snorted under their breath. The room was still thick with shock, but the power dynamic had flipped so violently that the air practically vibrated. The woman in the fancy coat, the one who'd asked if he was in the right line, cleared her throat loudly, trying to cover her discomfort. "I didn't mean, I just assumed." Michael didn't look at her. "I know what you assumed." Her face flushed pink. A man near the back whispered, "Holy hell." Another whispered back, "You see Collins? Man looks like he's about to faint." The telly printed the slip with trembling hands and held it out to Michael like it was some sacred document. He accepted it calmly. No smile, no gloating, no shift in posture. His heart didn't race. His pride didn't swell. He just felt tired. Tired of this happening. Tired of being an exception only when proven otherwise. Tired of people who respected him only after they saw a number. Collins forced a laugh. High-pitched, desperate. "If you ever need anything at all, Mr. Turner, please don't hesitate to reach out to me personally. I can assist with loans, investments, VIP services." "I'm good," Michael said gently. "But your account, your balance, sir, you qualify for—" "I said I'm good." For the first time, Michael looked him directly in the eyes. Collins wilted under the calm, steady gaze. A new kind of silence fell. The shame kind. The realization kind. The "we really messed up" kind. Michael slipped the paper into his pocket and stepped aside. He didn't storm off. He didn't give a speech. He didn't make a scene. He simply walked. As he moved toward the exit, the room parted for him the way it never had before. People stepped aside quickly, respectfully, some avoiding eye contact altogether, others staring openly. Every pair of eyes burned with something different. Embarrassment, curiosity, regret, guilt, shock, shame. Michael kept his shoulders steady, but the weight on them felt heavier than when he'd walked in. Because this wasn't pride. This wasn't vindication. This wasn't a win. This was a reminder. A reminder that dignity shouldn't depend on digits. Respect shouldn't depend on wealth, and racism didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived exactly like this. Quiet, polite, dressed in bank uniforms and fake smiles. Halfway to the door, someone murmured, "If I had that kind of money, no way I'd take the bus." Michael paused. He didn't turn around. He didn't engage. He just exhaled. A tired, knowing exhale, and pushed the glass door open. A gust of warm air hit him as he stepped outside. But inside the bank, the humiliation lingered, just inverted. The people who'd laughed before now stood red-faced, awkward, speechless. Michael didn't even look back. He didn't need to. He'd lived this moment enough times to know exactly what it looked like. Michael stepped out into the sunlight like a man walking away from a fire he hadn't started, but still somehow smelled like. He inhaled slowly, letting the warm air settle over him. It didn't relax him, not fully, but it eased the tightness in his chest just enough to keep him steady. The bank door closed behind him with a soft thud, muffled through the glass. He didn't storm away, didn't pull out his phone, didn't mutter a single curse. He just walked. One slow step after another, hands in his pockets, shoulders low with a weight he'd carried long before this morning. He didn't want anyone to see his frustration. He didn't want to make a scene outside. He didn't want to relive what had just happened. But someone watched him leave. Someone who had been watching the whole time. Near the corner of the lobby, at a small writing table where customers filled out deposit slips, a woman in her mid-40s stood frozen with her phone in her hand. She wasn't dressed fancy, jeans, a soft sweater, curls tucked into a simple clip. But she had the kind of presence people didn't notice until she spoke. Olivia James. Quiet, observant, not the type to intervene loudly, but the type who rarely missed details. She'd seen everything. The snubs, the glances, the tone shift, the mockery, the instant flip when the balance appeared. And she'd recorded it, not out of nosiness, not to humiliate anyone, but because she'd seen this bank treat people differently too many times before. She'd told herself she imagined it. She'd told herself it wasn't her place. She'd told herself maybe she was reading into things. But what she saw today, undeniable. Michael didn't know she was recording, didn't know she'd captured every moment. Olivia hesitated as he walked away, phone still in her hand, thumb hovering over the stop button. Her heart beat fast with a strange mix of anger and sadness. Not sadness for him, but sadness for the world that forced men like him to swallow disrespect so gracefully. She lowered the phone and ended the recording. Inside the bank, employees were still scrambling, voices rising behind the glass, the manager pacing in frantic circles. Olivia glanced their way but felt no sympathy. They weren't victims. They were exposed. She looked down at the video, replaying it briefly. Collins rolling his eyes, the snickers, the dismissal, and then the shock, the gasps, the shift in tone. Olivia's jaw tightened. She opened her messaging app and typed out a caption with slow, careful fingers. Respect people before you know their balance. She didn't mention Michael's name, didn't identify him in any way, didn't want to exploit him or drag him into the spotlight without consent. She just posted the truth, not to humiliate the man in the suit, not to go viral, but because silence lets moments like this repeat. She uploaded the video to a local community forum, the kind where neighbors complained about sidewalks, shared lost dog posts, and occasionally exposed bad service. She didn't expect anything dramatic. A few reactions, some discussion, maybe a small wave of outrage. That was all. Meanwhile, outside the bank, Michael continued walking down the sidewalk, his steps steady but heavy. He didn't know his life had just split into a before and an after. He didn't know a stranger had captured what he'd endured. He didn't know a 10-second clip would ripple across the city by nightfall. He just paused at the crosswalk, hands deep in his pockets, replaying the humiliation in his mind. The tone, the comments, the assumptions. You can check your balance at the ATM. If it's that small. This line is for customers. You sure you're in the right place? Probably needs overdraft help. He closed his eyes briefly. He didn't want the attention. He didn't want the revenge. He didn't want the pity. He just wanted to walk into a bank and be treated like a person. Behind him, Olivia stepped outside, watching him disappear into the crowd. She didn't chase after him, didn't call his name. She didn't even know it. She didn't try to thank him or involve him further. Some stories, she knew, weren't meant to be interrupted in the moment. Instead, she whispered under her breath, "You deserved better." Then she turned and walked away, toward her car, toward her own day, unaware of how fast the video would spread, how far it would reach, and how many conversations it was about to ignite. Michael turned a corner and kept moving, shoulders rounded, tired eyes fixed on the sidewalk. He didn't feel powerful. He didn't feel wealthy. He didn't feel. He felt tired. Tired of the looks, tired of the assumptions, tired of the tiny cuts that bled in silence. Tired of dignity being a thing he had to armor himself with every single day. He walked home the same way he always did. Quiet, modest, unnoticed. He didn't know the camera had captured the moment, his silence cut louder than any shout could. He didn't know the world was about to hear his story without him ever saying a word. The video didn't explode instantly. It started small. A few comments, a handful of shares, a spark flickering in the corner of the internet. But truth has a way of catching fire. By noon, 50 people had shared it. By 3, it had reached a local news blogger. By 6, it was circulating through neighborhood Facebook groups, Twitter threads, and community pages, with captions like, "This is why people talk about systemic bias. Humiliation flips fast when the truth comes out." If he didn't have money, would they have treated him like garbage the whole time? By nightfall, the flame had become a blaze. The video assembled itself into a narrative the bank could not escape. The snubs, the tone, the condescension, the manager's arrogance, the laughter, and then the shock. The 8-figure balance glowing on screen like a punchline delivered by fate. Comment sections filled with outrage. "Fire that manager immediately. This is racism, plain and simple. He handled it better than I ever could have." Imagine treating a grown man like that just because of his skin and clothes. Now imagine how they treat people without 8-figure accounts. Someone reposted the clip with slow-motion zooms. Another added captions. A third uploaded a reaction video, voice cracking with anger. The story was simple. A calm, respectful black man treated like less than, until money forced everyone to see him differently. While the world talked, Michael sat alone in his apartment, unaware of any of it. He sat at his small table, stirring a pot of soup, moving almost robotically. His mind replayed the moment in the bank again and again. Not the shock part, not the reveal, but the beginning. The teller's shift in posture, the man cutting in line, the assumptions, the whispering, the tone, sharp, clipped, dismissive. He'd lived that moment before, many times, too many times. It wasn't new. It wasn't surprising. But something about today hit differently. Sharper, deeper, like a cut that finally reached a nerve. He sat back in his chair and rubbed a hand over his face. Why did it still bother him so much? Why did moments like that still stab, even after years of building armor? He didn't cry. He rarely cried. But he felt it. That heaviness, that ache, that exhaustion that came from the world demanding he stay graceful in the face of disrespect. His phone buzzed once. Then again, and again. He frowned, reaching for it. Missed calls, texts, notifications stacking like bricks. From friends. "Dude, is this you? Please tell me you saw this." From coworkers. "Michael, call me ASAP. Corporate wants to talk to you." From a number he didn't recognize. "We sincerely apologize and would like to request a meeting." He scrolled, confused. Then he saw the link. The video. His chest tightened. Michael stared for a long moment, thumb hovering over the screen. Part of him didn't want to press it. Didn't want to see himself in that vulnerable place. Didn't want to relive it from someone else's perspective. But he tapped it anyway. His face appeared. His voice. His stillness. His patience. Then their voices. "ATM is faster. If it's that small, are you in the right line?" Collins was summoned to the office by noon. He walked in confidently. For the first 10 seconds. Then he saw the faces. The screen paused on his smirk. The audio clip of him saying, "If it's that small." He sank into the chair like the world had dropped out from under him. Back in his apartment, Michael leaned forward, head in his hands. He didn't want a spotlight. He didn't want apologies. He didn't want pity. He wanted one thing: dignity. And that was the one thing no one had offered him today. Not even in the fallout. His phone buzzed again. Then again. The weight of everything pressed down until he couldn't tell whether he was exhausted or furious or both. He whispered to the empty room, "I wish none of this happened." And for the first time since morning, his shoulders truly slumped. Michael tried not to look, but it was everywhere. People breaking down every second of the footage. People analyzing the glances, the tone, the posture. People defending him like he'd suddenly become some symbol. It made him uncomfortable. He didn't want to be anyone's symbol. He wanted to buy groceries without whispers. He wanted to sit on the bus without people staring. He wanted to walk into a building without someone nudging their friend. He wanted normal, but normal wouldn't return until the story finished unfolding. Mr. Collins stood in a small office at the regional headquarters, packing a cardboard box with trembling hands. A plant, a few pens, a nameplate he once polished every morning. He had been fired. Not just suspended, not just reprimanded, fired. His face was still red from the meeting where corporate told him everything. "You violated protocol. You showed bias. You embarrassed the company. You treated a high-value client like he was beneath you." They never said the word racism. Of course they didn't. But Collins felt the meaning in every sentence. He muttered bitterly under his breath, "All this over one customer?" A coworker glanced at him sharply. That customer could have been anyone. That's the problem. Collins didn't reply. He closed the box, tucked it under his arm, and walked out of the office without looking back. Every employee stood straighter, spoke more carefully, watched their tone, watched their faces. They weren't just polite, they were respectful. Deeply, intentionally respectful. Training had already begun, the real kind. Community leaders came in to speak. Discussions were held about implicit bias, microaggressions, barriers Black customers face daily. Posters went up about equality and dignity, not the cheesy corporate kind, but the kind shaped by community voices. Customers noticed, everyone noticed, and corporate issued a public statement. "We deeply apologize to Mr. Turner. We will implement mandatory anti-bias training across our branches. We are committed to long-term systemic change." Michael didn't care about PR, but accountability? He'd take that. Michael walked into the bank again. Not because he needed anything, not because he wanted to test them, but because he refused to let fear or humiliation determine which spaces he occupied. The moment he stepped through the door, the room fell silent. Not with discomfort this time, but with awareness. A teller hurried forward with genuine respect in her voice. "Good morning, Mr. Turner." Another nodded politely. The security guard straightened. "Sir." Michael gave a small, calm nod. "Morning." He walked to the counter, not rushing, not hiding, just moving with the steady confidence of a man who knew his worth didn't depend on anyone's tone. The new branch manager, a woman named Miss Ramirez, stepped forward with a professional yet warm expression. "Mr. Turner," she said gently, "I want you to know we appreciate you coming back, and I'm truly sorry for your previous experience." He studied her for a moment, noting her sincerity. "I appreciate that," he said quietly. "And just so you know," she added, voice firm, "everyone here has undergone new training. Not because of a PR push, Because it was needed. Michael nodded once. Good. A quiet voice behind him added, You changed this place. He turned. Olivia James stood near the chairs, her purse slung over her shoulder, expression kind but cautious, like she didn't want to overstep. I didn't change anything, Michael said gently. I just stood there and took it. Olivia shook her head. No, you stayed calm. You kept your dignity, and sometimes, dignity is louder than anger. Michael let those words settle in his chest. Olivia stepped closer. Thank you for how you handled it, for making people look at themselves, for not letting them treat you like less. He gave a small, warm smile, the kind that reached the eyes but carried a hint of sadness. Sometimes, he said softly, you teach people how wrong they were without saying a word. Olivia nodded. Exactly. There was a pause, a gentle one, not awkward, the kind shared between two people who understood the weight of silence. Michael looked around the bank. Employees purposeful, customers watching respectfully. Michael shook his head. No, thank you. I'm just taking a look around. She smiled. You're welcome here, always. He nodded once more, then turned to leave, his step slow, steady. And as he reached the door, he heard Olivia's quiet voice. You handled it with grace. Michael paused, looking back at her. His voice was gentle, but strong enough to carry across the room. Sometimes dignity speaks louder than anger. Then he walked out, the sunlight washing over him like a quiet victory. The city moved around Michael like nothing had changed. Cars honked. People crossed streets. Bus brakes hissed at every stop. Life continued, loud, busy, indifferent. But inside him, something had shifted. Not dramatically. He walked his usual route, past the bakery with the sweet smell of warm bread, past the barber shop with laughter spilling out into the sidewalk, past the tiny bookstore with faded posters in the window. Nothing looked different, but he felt different. Not because he'd been proven wealthy, not because the bank apologized, not because people now whispered respect instead of assumptions. He felt different because he'd reclaimed something, a piece of himself, a piece the world kept trying to take, one microaggression at a time. He crossed the street and headed toward the bus stop. The afternoon sun painted long shadows, warm and soft against the pavement. Michael found his usual seat under the shelter and sat quietly, letting the city hum fill the space inside his thoughts. His reflection in the shelter's glass looked back at him, tired, thoughtful, grounded. He whispered to himself, People judge what they think they see. The words drifted into the air like a confession he'd been holding back for years. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. They don't look deeper. He thought about Collins, about the teller, about the customers who cut the line, about every person who saw his skin and instantly assumed his story. He thought about Olivia, a stranger who didn't know him, didn't owe him anything, but still recorded the truth when others looked away. He thought about the executives, stiff, uncomfortable, suddenly respectful once they knew who he was. He thought about how one number had flipped a whole room, not because it proved his success, but because it proved their prejudice. He shook his head softly. Money didn't teach them respect, he whispered. My silence did. My patience did. The bus rolled up with a low rumble, doors opening with a familiar hiss. Michael stepped inside, greeting the driver with a nod. The same seat waited for him. Second row, left side. By the window. Routine. Comfort. Normal. He sat resting his head against the cool glass as the bus pulled away. Outside, buildings blurred into streaks of color. The same city he'd always known. The same place where assumptions followed him like shadows. But today, he didn't shrink from them. He didn't shrink from anything. Because he realized something important. Respect couldn't be bought. It couldn't be proven. It couldn't be forced out of people who didn't want to give it. But he could demand it by refusing to bend. He could demand it by standing in his truth, by staying composed, by remaining whole in a world that kept trying to chip away at him. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, let the weight finally slip from his shoulders. His voice, soft, reflective, steady, filled the quiet space around him. Never let someone's small mind shrink your worth. He opened his eyes just as the bus rounded a corner, the late afternoon sun breaking through the window and washing his face in warm gold. A quiet spotlight on a man who carried dignity like armor. Not loud, not dramatic, not for show, just steady, just real, just his. The bus moved forward toward the next stop, toward the next day, toward the next ordinary moment waiting to be lived. Michael leaned back in his seat, hands folded in his lap, gaze calm as the world passed by. He had walked into a bank as a man who'd learned to endure bias quietly. He walked out as a man who refused to carry it alone anymore. Some storms come to destroy. Some storms come to reveal. This one had revealed him, not to the world, but to himself. And he was done shrinking, done apologizing, done pretending he didn't see the patterns people tried so hard to hide. He whispered one last line to himself, a final truth, but it echoes. And with that echo quietly settling inside him, Michael rode home. Not changed, but affirmed. Not louder, but stronger. Not richer, but finally seen.